The Icons of Real Estate podcast. Are you ready to learn the proven money-making secrets from top-producing icon agents? Ready to skyrocket your business? This podcast is for you. Tune in every week with your host, Tomasz Fonseca, and find out how to implement proven strategies to 10 times your business. From $3 million to $30 million in just 12 months. Brought to you by the Masters in Real Estate Marketing, Arter SEO.
So welcome to the Icons of Real Estate podcast, where we highlight top professionals who are making waves in the industry. I'm your host, Karen Roberts, and today I'm joined by Joan Herlong, a real estate powerhouse with over 30 years of experience. She is known for her grit, integrity, and client-first mindset. From launching her boutique agency during a recession to leading Herlong Sotheby's International Realty, Joan has topped the Greater Greenville MLS for a decade and continues to inspire agents across the region. So let's dive into her journey, wisdom, and wit. So welcome to the show, Joan.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's go back to your backstory. You've had an incredible journey from journalism and advertising to real estate. So what inspired that pivot into real estate back in 93?
I would say that, and I do talk about, I'm going to shamelessly plug my book. Okay. I wrote a book called As Is, An Insider's Guide to Real Estate. And that, it's not my life story. It's not a memoir, but it does talk about how I wound up in real estate. I didn't wind up in real estate the way a lot of people back into it. I think I've turned a lot of people off from real estate, hopefully, because I have a lot of coffees with people and I ask them, why real estate? Particularly women, because I think they often have this wrong answer. And the wrong answer is, I really love houses. I just love people. I'm a really people person. Very few people talk about that they work hard. Very few people talk about liking that you eat what you kill, that your income is really based on your performance. I truly think that one of the best training grounds for knowing that you could be a success in real estate is having a background in the hospitality industry, specifically being a waiter, a waitress, or a bartender, because you eat what you kill in that industry as well. I did wait tables in high school and college. So I was very familiar with that, eat what you kill. However, I backed into real estate because one of the things that, when you're 18, you don't know really what you want to do. You might still say, oh, I want to grow up to be a ballerina or a fireman or whatever. When I was 18, the one thing I was certain of was that I had absolutely no interest in ever doing anything real estate related. And the reason for that was because my mother went into real estate when I was 17. And she was a great success in her own right. She didn't go to work per se outside the home until I was 17 and she was 57. I was born when she was 40. I'm the second youngest of 12 children. Hopefully that's not the only interesting thing about me, because honestly, I just showed up. You don't get to choose your family. But my mother, I've since learned that my mother was not unique, and that some people, I'm sure there are people who are obsessed with their job in every industry, but my mother was truly obsessed to the point where anything that wasn't real estate oriented didn't just take a back seat. It was like in the trailer in the back. And I didn't like riding in the car with her because there was never a straight line from point A to point B. She always took a detour. And I knew that she was taking a detour to drive by some house that she had heard was coming on the market, or she wanted to accidentally on purpose run into the owner or something like that. And it drove me crazy. It absolutely drove me crazy. And she often drafted me into hosting open houses for her. And I had absolutely I was a sulky 17 and 18-year-old being dragged into something I had no interest in. She also, and I talk about this in the book, she would often preface a story by asking the question, do you want to hear something really interesting? Who would say no? But I very quickly learned to say, no, I'm not interested in interesting things. Because it wasn't interesting. She would say, do you want to hear something really interesting? And it would be about real estate. And I didn't care about real estate. Then one of my sisters went into real estate with her. And it was even worse because then it was in stereo. And they would talk about real estate when the rest of the family were around. And it would be like they were speaking in a completely different language. They could be speaking in Russian and the rest of us don't speak a word of Russian. And it's not like we felt left out. We were bored by it. The one thing I knew I was never, ever going to do was real estate. However, I did see that my mother and that sister were very successful in their own right. They still knew what their children looked like as long as they wanted to. And they called their own shots. They started their own business. That aspect of it impressed me. It did. So then in 1993, I have 4 children at that time. And I had been staying home raising 4 children for 7 years. So I started when the 3rd one was born. I started staying home full time. And then when the 4th one was born, that started to wear thin and I think this is true of a lot of women who are staying home and raising children full time. It's the hardest work I will ever do. And it is the one type of work that for some ironic reason prompts other people to automatically underestimate you. And I think I'm guilty of caring too much what those other people said. But when we would go to events, and my husband is an attorney, and so we'd go to a lot of events through his law firm or whatever, and we'd see other couples. And when particularly men would say, what is it that you do? And I'd say, I'm staying at home with 4 hungry children. They'd immediately look over my shoulder to see if there was somebody with a brain that they could talk to, because they had nothing in common with that. On the same token, when you're staying at home with children, every volunteer organization thinks that they are entitled to your time because you're not working anyway. I hate air quotes. But anyway, so I just felt underestimated and I felt underutilized. And quite frankly, I guess I had a form of cabin fever. I've got to do something more, just like a lot of men have. They want something more. Most everybody wants a family, wants children, but there are very few men who say that's enough for them. And if that makes me have a more masculine trait, guilty as charged, but I don't think it's masculine. I think it's human. To his great credit, my husband has never been one that I felt like I had to ask permission for anything. We don't give each other permission. We are very much a partnership. So when I reached a point where I said, look, I know it's going to be a loss of income for us, but when we had our 3rd child, I said, I don't care if we can't afford to eat meat. I will eat macaroni and cheese 7 days a week, but I feel the need to stay home for a while because childcare was so expensive and it was such a revolving door. He just said, whatever you want, I'm going to defer to you on that. I'm not going to make you sign any agreement one way or the other. And when the youngest was 1 and I said, I need something more, he said, go for it. And when I said, I think I'm going to take the real estate course, he said, are you sure? Because he knew that, but I'll tell you what was attractive to me about it. You eat what you kill. I didn't want to dabble. I knew it was a real way to make some real income, to help us as a family live the life that I wanted to live. And I wanted to be a contributing member. I didn't want his money to be our money. I wanted our money to be our money. And I had this fantasy when I went into it that I could do it part-time. It was a fantasy for me because, quite honestly, most real estate agents out there are quite part-time, the vast majority. People talk about that, 80-20 rule, 20% of us do 80% of the business. In real estate, it's more like 3% of us do 97% of the business. And with my first broker, whom I loved and I still do, I said, can I do this part-time? And he said, well, sure. But we didn't know each other. And he said, yeah, most people do this. Yeah, that's fine. Sure, you can do this part-time. I sold my first house in 2 weeks. It was like catnip. It really was. And now I didn't become obsessed. I did not. I was not going to let myself go down the path that my mother had paved, because she was very helpful in that she showed me how I did not want to practice real estate. Okay. I'm not trying to throw her under the bus, but I was not going to be obsessed with anything. But after 6 weeks, I said to my broker, you said I could do this part-time. This is not working out. This is definitely a full-time job. And let's face it, real estate agents are usually working when other people are not. So your spouse, your partner has to buy into your success as your support system, or you're not going to be a success. And so my husband really had to take up a lot of the slack on weekends. And he was the single parent on weekends or evenings, but he never did it with any complaint, because he saw that I was successful and he wanted me to enjoy that success. I'm giving you a really long answer to a really short question, Ty. And that's my Achilles heel.
No, because everybody has a unique story, but it's fascinating the way yours has come into it. You've almost come into it backwards. No, I love that.
Yeah, I backed into it. I would say that I'm an accidental realtor. The thing that I had to be careful of was, and it was a constant tug of war. My mother then assumed that whenever she spoke with me, that I wanted to talk about real estate. And I absolutely refused. That was not going to be the basis of my relationship with anybody except my clients. And that was highly annoying to her. And I can remember her saying once, we fully explored the weather. She didn't want to talk about my children. She'd had enough of children and grandchildren. She had 40 grandchildren. She liked them fine over there. But when she would ask me about what deals I was working, then suddenly my roast was burning and I had to go. And that bothered her. And also when she would ask me if I wanted to hear something really interesting, I'd say, no, I'm not really interested in any interesting stories today. Thanks. But it was a constant tug of war, because she felt like, oh, we finally have something in common. And I thought, finally? I'm your daughter. It's not the only thing that we have in common. And she continued to practice real estate in a way that I certainly do not and did not. And I once told her, Mom, I wouldn't work in a company where you in the same office, just for the record. I would not work in an office that would have you, because she was so focused on the deal and didn't let other things get in the way of the deal sometimes. But I did love her dearly. I did. I want to go on record for that.
Everybody, there you go. You've just put out there, so many see it as purely transactional.
Yeah.
And so you don't. And so there are different ways of doing it. Now, even starting your own boutique agency during a recession,
I backed into that as well.
That takes guts. So what gave you the confidence to take the leap, and what did you learn from it?
It wasn't confidence. It was terror. I felt like I didn't have any other choice. And the reason is my husband, he's a trial attorney. And a lot of people say, oh, trial attorney, that's terrible. The fact is, when you take on a lawsuit as the plaintiff's attorney, particularly when it grows into what's called a class action lawsuit, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to progress on that case. Okay. And at one point, it was him versus 17 lawyers at 3 different law firms. Okay. And they were all just slow walking it because they knew that they could probably bleed him dry. Almost did. And I always referred to it as the bridge case, because if he had not won that case, then we'd be living under a bridge today. Okay. So I was supporting his case. I was supporting him. And I reached a point where I kept looking for signs. Should I go out on my own? Because I was part of the largest company in town, and I was their #1 solo producer. And I produced more than a lot of their teams or groups. And so there is a safety in that. But on the other hand, you're splitting that with your brokerage. And I needed every penny. I needed every penny because we were up to our eyeballs in debt. And we had these 4 kids, and kids do need things like food, shelter, new sneakers. We had a mortgage to pay. It was a panic mode. And I kept looking for signs, and it was a leap of faith, but it was also, I knew that I could go back if I had to. And that's not arrogance. When I left, they said, if you feel like you've made a mistake, you can always come back. But I needed to try because I wanted to make sure that I was doing everything I possibly could to support our family. That was the driving impetus for it. And that expression in Finding Nemo, just keep swimming. Okay, that was me. I just put my head down and I kept swimming. And so I went out on my own in mid-December of 2011, which was a very dark time in the US economically. We were in a recession and we didn't know when we were going to come out of it. At the end of 2012, I started getting congratulatory texts from friendly competitors. What a great year, what a great achievement. And I did not know what they were talking about. And they said, you're the number 1 selling agent by volume for our whole area. I was so focused on just doing the deal, doing the next deal, just keep swimming. I called somebody in our MLS and I said, how do they know? And he said, now that you're an owner of your own little single, you have access to MLS data that I never had as an agent. And it didn't occur to me to wonder what I didn't have access to because I didn't know. Because in the large companies, they like to create their own universe and say, oh, you're the number 1 agent in this office, or you're the number 1 agent in this neighborhood. And that way they can all celebrate small successes. And that's a good thing. But they never told me where I stood in the greater universe, okay, in terms of our market. And so that was very eye-opening to me because I felt like I was just doing what I'd been doing. I was just doing more of it. In that first year, I remember we went away for a 3-day weekend in Asheville, which is about 50 minutes north of us in North Carolina. And we had a 3-day weekend. It was President's Day weekend in February. And then from that Monday until the following Labor Day, which is the end of summer, including the 4th of July, I worked every day. Every day. I do not recommend that to anyone. Don't. But it's fueled by panic. And a good friend and a business mentor of mine, Henry, I saw him at a charity benefit. And he said to me, I know what the secret of your success is. He said, I think you're doing good. This is my first year independently on my own. And I said, do tell, because I didn't know what the secret was. And he said, terror. I can see that you're absolutely terrified. And I said, yeah, it's a very effective incentive tool. It really is. I don't recommend it to anybody to work as hard or as much as I did, but I didn't feel like I had any choice.
And you were driven. You were driven.
Yeah, but I was scared. If I didn't, and if we somehow failed as a couple, as a family, I wanted to be sure that I had, what's that expression of leaving it all on the field? To leave it all on the field and make sure that I had done everything that I could. Work ethic has never been a problem for me, but that first year, it was like, I very rarely came up for air. But our children were also aware of it. We were very open and transparent about where we were, fairly transparent about where we were financially. I didn't tell them about the bridge thing, that if I don't work late, we're going to be living under the Pete Hollis Bridge. I didn't say that. But so, yeah, I went independent, sort of in a bass-backward way. And my success, or my ramped up success, was fueled by something other than client service. It was truly fright. It was fright.
And so nowadays, though, things I'm sure are a lot calmer. So how many sort of transactions will you do in a year to go up there with all these awards and accolades?
Okay, that's a good question, because last year I did 45 transactions.
That's more than enough for one person, right?
Oh, it is. But I know an agent in our market who did 90. And I worry, does she have a life? Because I know what it's like to not have enough of a life.
Yeah,
and that it's not
sleep.
something I recommend. But I've proven everything that I need to prove in terms of sales. I have the record-setting sale on the listing side in our area for just under 10 million. And I have the record-setting sale as a buyer agent in our area for 9.3 million.
So what's next? What's next for Joan?
What gets me out of bed every day, other than my husband bringing me a cup of tea, is I find that I really like, now I didn't set out to recruit other agents. I didn't. When Sotheby's came calling in 2017, we were a merry little band of 10 agents, including me and including my dear friend and at that time assistant, now our office manager, Venetia. And the people who had joined me, some of them were former clients who decided to go into real estate, but I didn't recruit any of them because I was busy. I was busy working. But then, so when Sotheby's came calling, and I was like, why would I want to join a club that would have me as a member? I wasn't, and you can't really call up Sotheby's International Realty and say, excuse me, I'd like to join you. I suppose it's done, but I've never heard of it. But when they came and asked for a half hour of my time on the first day, which quickly became a 90-minute conversation, a real meeting of the minds, I was still very suspicious of like, why? I'm not broken. I don't need fixing. But I would say that Sotheby's International Realty, they have kept every promise they've made to me and then some. I felt like I already knew what it was like to work for a big corporate entity, but they're completely different. They really are completely different. And they cater to the same market that I was already catering to. I deal with, as the poem goes, I deal with a lot of doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. Most of our clients have bought and sold several properties, and their most valuable asset is their time. And they want to feel like they're turning over this very important process of either finding a home or selling their home to a peer, somebody who will do the job as well as they would if they just had the time. And I feel like we deliver that. And one of the questions, again, I just keep talking. You got to ask me more.
You're fine. You're fine.
Bite size, because I just keep talking. And that's not.
This is great. And it's great insights for the people who are listening, right? Because not everybody's having the kind of success that you're having. Look, finally, because here at Icons, we are not just a podcast. We're the #1 real estate podcast network globally because we're passionate about making podcasting accessible to everybody involved in the business of real estate, whether you're a realtor, broker, investor, even mortgage lender. So, Joan, if you were to have your own podcast, what do you think you'd call it?
My son and broker in charge, Jack, and we've bounced this around a bit. It would be whining about real estate with a pun on wine and doing it over.
Love it.
Or the other one would be like real tea. Get the pun, real tea, TEA, as in spilling the tea about what it's really like, real estate. Because,
love it.
But I don't want to, you know what I wouldn't call it? I wouldn't call it, do you want to hear something really interesting? Yeah.
Quite clearly.
Yeah. But I think that the big mistake that people make over and over again, which is why the turnover rate in real estate for new agents is so high. If 100 agents get their license today in my market, I think 40 will still have their license a year from today. You wash out very quickly. People think that it's easy money. They think that it is easy work. If this were easy, there wouldn't be a whole industry dedicated to it. And you'll notice I do not call it a profession because I don't want to insult professionals by implying that I'm a professional. I like to think that I do professional level work, but real estate is not a profession. There is no barrier to entry. You want to know what the requirements are in my state?
Yeah,
okay.
What is it?
In South Carolina, in order to get your real estate license, you have to have your GED, which is an alternative to a high school diploma. So you have to have your GED. You have to be at least 18. You have to have a pulse. I'm not sure whether you have to have brain waves, but my favorite part is that you have to have a reasonably clean criminal record. Reasonably clean. I don't like clean is not enough, but so there's effectively no barrier to entry. And that explains in large measure the washout rate. But I think it's mostly because people think that they're going to be dealing with really pretty houses and lovely people. And I know my assistant showed 6 houses for me this morning. And she was like, good Lord, these people. And it's not unusual for a buyer or a seller to mistake a real estate agent for something that you scrape off the bottom of your shoe. And if that is something that, if that's a standard that a real estate agent wants to tolerate, that's up to them. But that's not something that I tolerate, because I know there's something more to offer than that.
But that's why there's a big difference between a realtor and a successful realtor. Right. So if you're looking to recruit people as well as buy and sell, if any of the listeners want to reach out, where do they find you, Joan?
They find us, they find me and all of my wonderful agents on our website, which is Herlong, SIR, as in Sotheby's International Realty, herlongsir.com. Or they can just go to sothebysrealty.com and search for the upstate of South Carolina, and you'll find us.
Fantastic. Joan, this has absolutely been a pleasure. What a great storyteller you are.
Does it make you want to go into real estate? No, probably not.
I just love the podcasting. I just love being able to have the conversations and hear the stories of people as to why they go into real estate. So thank you for taking your time out today to speak with me. And to the listeners, I will be back next time with another icon of real estate. Bye for now.
This was fun. Thanks.